get this orientation started for today. We'll turn it over to Larry Edwards. Larry?
All right, thank you, Nyota. So thank you for attending our September ASQ Government Division webinar, which is hosted on behalf of ASQ in concert with our Government Division. And today our technical lead, or moderator, is Ms. Nyota Brown. Thank you, Nyota. Quick overview of the Government Division and ASQ at large. So ASQ represents the voice of quality for over 80,000 members around the world. The Government Division is one of 26 of those divisions, and our focus is on improving the quality of government and the services for the residents and the people that are consuming those services of government. And you can find us here at our MyASQ site, and this site hosts past event information, newsletters, has some excellent resources. So you come see us there, come visit us there, join the team. The Government Division is a community of practitioners, as I said before, but it's not just one level of government. It is federal, state, local, and international government. So government at all levels is part of what ASQ government is seeking to engage and extend quality and improve. We're comprised of leaders in government and employees. So the leaders inside of government, employees, seasoned experts, consultants, practitioners, students, a whole variety. Government is a wraparound service, and we want wraparound participation. So join our community. All right. So upcoming webinars. Right now we're at TBD, to be discovered, or actually to be announced, and we'll come back to that. I'm thinking, we're sourcing for our October webinar, but when we have it, go there to our Government Division site at the MyASQ under events, and you'll find that. In the next set of webinars will be announced here really soon. All right, so in order to interact with today's webinar, what I'd ask you to do is go ahead and, as our presenter is presenting, and you have questions, please use that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, the bottom right hand of the screen, and type your questions in. And as our presenter is closing with his closing statements and concluding, we'll start to address some of those questions and distribute those alike. Contact information for our division officers and speakers can be found at the end of the presentation. So when we get there, you'll see how to contact us individually. And most webinars are available for download within a few days. So we'll cover on how you can get hold of those webinars for download, or get the link to it. But now is my distinguished pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Allan Cohn. Allan, you're up. Take the mic, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Larry. And it is an absolute pleasure and honor to be here. And we'll talk about the roadmap to government accountability and effectiveness, and how the principles and tools can be applied to produce world-class legislation. So learning objectives are to understand the importance of basic principles in anchoring an operational excellence program. I'll talk a little about barriers to implementation of public sector operational programs, and talk about the entrepreneurial approach that has been necessary for me to get this started, and really that entrepreneurial approach, how it's important for any successful operational excellence program. So the specific agenda is, I'll give a little bit of an introduction, a little bit about myself. I'll talk about the government accountability and effectiveness principles that are really guiding my work. I'll talk about examples of quality in industry that can be applied to quality in government, and then we'll wrap up talking about how this work fits in to the broader work of ASQ's Government Division. So a little bit about me and my quality journey. And just to kind of frame who I am, I'm from Chicago. I actually moved from there to the San Francisco Bay Area, spent about 8 years there, and then moved to where I am today, which is in Solon, Ohio, which is just outside of Cleveland. Been there for about 30 years. Married, 2 grown daughters. I'm an avid sports fan. I love good food. I love to travel. But I also feel like a good and effective government is incredibly important. I'm passionate about it. And my specific quality journey, I actually started out as a paint chemist. I was in the paint industry for about 20 years, and the last 13 of those years were spent in quality-related responsibilities. And then from there, I decided I wanted to see how the quality work I had done would be applicable in a service industry, so going from manufacturing to service. And I moved into insurance, and specifically the quality areas that I focused on there were call center and IT quality. And then did a little bit of soul searching and decided I wanted to stick with this quality thing, but I wanted to do it in a venue where maybe it would have more of a meaningful impact. And that's how I got, or when I got into healthcare. And I spent 10 plus years as the quality director at Cleveland Clinic Children's. Last March, I retired, and in addition to those things that I love to do, the good food, the travel, and sports, and my family, I started to speak up for good government. And what that's really all about, so I firmly believe that, we're supposed to be our government is supposed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. And really, we have strayed from that vision. And when I make a voting decision, I do it kind of as a hiring manager. And the politicians that we elect are supposed to represent us, but all too often, I feel like their efforts are focused on their donors, their party, and the next election. So that brings me to my charter. All good quality projects will have a charter to help guide the work, and that is my charter is to achieve meaningful improvement and accountability and effectiveness of our federal government by the end of the decade. So again, the focus is the federal government, and more specifically, it's around Congress and legislative processes. And my work is kind of the guardrails on it are driven by 9 accountability and effectiveness principles. So I will talk about those principles next. So the first of these is free and fair elections where anyone that's eligible to participate can easily do so. So simply put, this involves both access and integrity. And contrary to what some might say, those two are not mutually exclusive. And one of the things that I think provides a great roadmap for guiding this work is the paper that was reasonably published within ASQ, which is Advancing a Quality Management System for U.S. Elections. So the second of the 9 principles involves availability of accurate and unbiased information. And there's fact-checking organizations out there. I've been working with Pointer and PolitiFact as I start this journey. And they do a great job. But then the other piece to this is the ease of access. So if you're going and reading something and you want to know, well, is this true or is it not true? Yes, we all can go ahead and do our own fact-checking, but we need to make it easier, just given the nature of our society, the lack of time we have. So I think that's really key. And that availability of information needs to be both on candidates and issues. So this doesn't specifically, this is something that's available for the voter, and I'll talk about how this fits into kind of these broader principles. And I think the key piece is us as voters need to be partners with our elected officials. So when you think about the elected officials and the work that they're tasked to do, we really need there to be a shared commitment to problem solving and doing it through consensus building. And I'll talk a little bit more later on in the presentation about the concept of what versus how in the products they produce or the legislation they produce. And really the key here is having a commitment or loyalty to doing the work of the people as opposed to election and party loyalty. And certainly we can't discount the fact that the next election and party loyalty are key drivers, but if the work of the field, work of the people, and that commitment to problem solving really is the biggest driver of the work, then we're going to have more consistent, good quality legislation. So respect and embrace of opposing views. Good legislation, the best legislation that comes out there are solutions that incorporate feedback and ideas from both sides of the aisle and across the political spectrum. Even in landslide elections, you're going to have the losing side get at least a third of the vote. So the other side's not going away, and to really embrace the ideas that come from across the political spectrum, that's, and for all of us, when we're doing quality improvement work, certainly the best quality projects, the best outcomes come from ensuring that we're getting broad-based input. So one of the things, I talked about the things that I like to do, travel being a big one of those. And so not long after my retirement date, actually in June, I was fortunate enough to take a driving trip from here in Northeast Ohio to the national parks in Montana and Wyoming. And as I had the time to drive through, one of the things that really was poignant to me through this whole lens of when I'm thinking about this effort to work on improving government was the huge differences, say, from New York City to rural Montana or here in Cleveland, Chicago. And as such, the lens with which the federal government is viewed is going to be very different in each of those areas. And the solutions to the problems, to national problems, need to rightly be applied differently in different parts of the country. So this also goes to that what versus how that I spoke to earlier. Good legislation would focus heavily on national objectives with regional solutions. So you're empowering local entities, but there would also be accountability with the resulting legislation. So I talked about the need for good information for us as the voters, and that helps support or underpin an active partnership between the public and our elected officials. And certainly there's the ask for input, and there's polling and such, but my feeling is very often that input, there's a lot of lip service and they're still trying to toe the party line. And an effective government and consistently good legislation results from active input from constituents. And the concept of citizens cabinets, there's a organization out there called Voice of the People that has really is working on that concept. And I think that potentially could be a very powerful tool to improving the effectiveness of our government. So lobbying obviously has a very bad connotation for many good reasons, but in reality, when we're doing our quality improvement projects or when legislators are working on their pieces of legislation, they need subject matter experts to ensure that they're creating the best possible product. So I think this is really a key principle to effective government and using evidence to help base the legislation, help drive the legislation. And I'll talk a lot more about that in a few minutes. So certainly when you have your lobbyists, you also need to tie that to strict rules to prevent conflicts of interest. And there are codes of conduct that I'm reasonably aware of within government, but there's still this very strong link between lobbying and political donations. And so I touched on that there's the opportunity to look at what's going on in industry. So, one of the things that I bring to the party, so I'm this, Midwestern guy, I'm an outsider, and I also have a lot of broad-based industry experience. Well, that certainly can be brought in and help support a highly functioning government. And one example of that would be corporate compliance departments. Many large companies, most large companies, have a corporate compliance departments to ensure that you don't have unnecessary conflict of interest. And certainly I think a lot can be learned in our government through looking at corporate compliance departments. So last and definitely not least, and this should certainly be near and dear to everybody that is on this webinar, is a shared commitment to excellence. So that means leveraging continuous improvement principles to help drive and support our government's effectiveness. So obviously that means like things like Lean and Six Sigma. And I'm going to talk in a few minutes about the possibility of a Congressional Office of Quality and Process Improvement. And one of the things that I think is really great about the timing of this webinar comes after last month's outstanding webinar that talked about the ANSI G1 standard. And I look at that as providing a great roadmap and a measuring stick for efficiency and effectiveness in government. And one of the things that I started drawing up on my project, there was a question of, well, how do you measure the success of what I'm trying to do? And I think this ANSI G1 standard is one tool for doing that. So I touched on a little bit the concept of benchmarking practices in industry. And as going back over a year ago now, where you had the tragedy, the horrible events in Minneapolis, and the potential for legislation to address that. Certainly, you think about what happened in Minneapolis and Derek Chauvin, and I think you would disagree with the fact that this was he disregarded accepted principles. Accountability is very appropriate for that. But then you think about the frequency of lethal force issues, how many times we've been reading about that in the newspapers, and the diversity of locations that it has occurred, all over the country, small cities and large cities. So all of us as quality practitioners should step back and look at that and say, well, that indicates a culture and systems issue. Well, similarly in healthcare, there are a number of papers out there that talk about medical errors being one of the leading causes of death in the United States. And the journey to high reliability, as we call it in healthcare, really involved looking at the culture and the systems that are in place. And certainly you still have to tie that to individual accountability. So I'm not going to walk through the tools here. You will have access to this presentation. I'm certainly happy to, at any time offline, talk about how we apply these tools in healthcare and how I think that they could be further applied to policing considerations. So the key here is both leveraging the example from industry to produce world-class legislation, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about good legislation really addressing the root cause of the issues that need to be addressed. So one of the organizations that I have been fortunate enough to work with is Issue One. They have a pretty broad-based view of improving government effectiveness, and it's largely through good governance and through a legislative approach. Well, they connected me with or made me aware of the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, and they worked with me on some testimony that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. The Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress is a bipartisan group, 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats, and they're tasked to essentially make recommendations and work to promote, to implement those recommendations to make Congress more effective, efficient, transparent, essentially do a better job of working on behalf of the American people. So this committee They have spanned multiple administrations, still in effect now, and they came up with 97 recommendations, and they cover about 15 areas of opportunity, so very broad-based. Some speak very much to the core of the things that I'm working towards or advocating for, and some are very just foundational, operational, for example, streamlining, organizing human resources, or improving their technology. But bottom line is 97 recommendations that they have on their plate. So one of the other things that they're giving some consideration to is establishing or reestablishing an office that would provide congresspeople and their staff with data and analysis of complicated scientific and technological issues. So I think that's a great idea, and that's where I was asked to submit testimony related to this specific proposal. And so what came out of that was I felt that's a good starting point. So all of us as quality practitioners know that good data and good analysis are critical to a good quality improvement project, but so much more is needed. And so what I have proposed is that they consider a Congressional Office of Quality and Process Improvement. So that office would help them to incorporate quality improvement methodology to improve the overall lawmaking process. And so the testimony that I submitted, keeping in mind that the audience are definitely not quality practitioners, I try to frame that in terms of here's how we would leverage quality tools to improve the lawmaking process. And the person I was working with at issue 1 to help finalize this testimony strongly recommended that I include industry examples with the testimony. So I'm going to share that information with you as kind of this is the possible approach to improving the lawmaking process. And of course, a good quality project starts with a problem statement and a smart aim. And so this is just illustrative. I said that, so let's say that over the past 10 years, Congress has identified 20 priority pieces of legislation per year, and only one of those pieces of legislation has made it to the finish line. So the objective of this, of the improving the lawmaking process and evidence-based legislating would be by the middle of this decade to achieve a 50% success rate for priority legislation. So now I'll talk about the kind of the approach that they might take. And again, this is kind of illustrative just to help support my recommendation. So a good quality project, of course, we all know that you need to determine what's your current state. And very frequently that's done through process mapping, whether it be a traditional process map or value stream map. And through that you can systematically identify failure points. So we use this approach in reducing errors in discharge medication reconciliation. And you would think that it's a fairly simple task to ensure that if you're leaving the hospital that you get a clean list of medications for when you get home. Well, it's not that simple, and there are a number of failure points. And so certainly starting with process mapping, we were able to identify some areas of opportunity and had a pretty successful project. So similarly, if they're going to go about and they agree upon a kind of a quality improvement approach to improving the legislative process, they could walk through past legislative efforts, walk through what the process is, and identify where in the process legislation frequently stalls or dies. So once you've identified your failure points, then you need to prioritize them. And probably one of the most common and easy to use tools is the impact effort matrix. It's one that I've found that non-quality practitioners can typically, with a little bit of coaching, can use it just as well as quality practitioners. Going back to my time in the call center, we used that tool to help us kind of sort through the many potential failure points to improve first call resolution. And in the call center environment, that is the #1 quality metric. And really, for wherever you are in quality, we all know that doing it right the first time is one of the objectives of good quality, and certainly from a call center perspective, that's the case. So this could be done to rank and prioritize the causes of legislative failures, and to some extent, I think there's a low-hanging fruit here. You talk about 97 recommendations that the Select Committee has come up with. They could certainly use the impact effort matrix to prioritize those 97 recommendations to identify the ones that will give them the biggest bang for their buck. So, of course, once you have prioritize what you're going to work on, you want to get to the root cause. And 5 whys is the simplest and most frequently employed tool for root cause analysis. The example I provided was on-time product delivery. So going back to my days in the paint industry, we ran into an issue where manufacturing products were arriving late to the store. Well, why were they arriving late to the stores? Because they were shipped late. They were shipped late because they weren't ready for shipment on time. They weren't ready for shipment on time because the batches were being completed late. They were being completed late because they were actually started late. And the reason they were being started late is because we weren't allowing for enough lead time for getting raw materials into the factory. So similar to what I articulated around lethal force policing, we need to ensure that our legislation addresses the source of the problem rather than a symptom of the problem. All right, so you get to your root cause, and then you want to figure out, okay, well, how do I tackle this? And a good quality project is going to rely on benchmarking. You don't want to recreate the wheel if you don't need to. Going back to healthcare, there have been, and the journey to what we call high reliability, we've certainly looked at high reliability industries such as aviation. You think about our aviation industry, and knock on wood, the frequency of catastrophic events is very low. And one of the things that the tools that they use to prevent catastrophic events is their pre-flight checklist. Well, that has been adapted in healthcare to pre-operative checklists. So before they can do that first cut, that first incision, they walk through, make sure they have all the supplies they need, that they have the right patient, that they're operating on the right location. So pre-operative checklists are a key thing now in healthcare, particularly in the surgical setting. And you think about what we in ASQ and the government division stands for. As Larry spoke to, we've got a representation from municipalities, states, and even other countries, and the Congressional Office of Quality and Process Improvement. So they're going to provide assistance on all of these things that I've talked about. They're going to help work with Congress and staff, and certainly a key responsibility of a Congressional Office of Quality and Process Improvement would be keeping their ear to the ground, know what best practices are out there, and try to leverage them to improve congressional practices and or to help leverage solutions at the local level for federal legislation. So piloting obviously is a key part when you're getting close to that finish line. A number of industries, just based on the way they're set up, need to do kind of that rapid cycle PDSA. And certainly we did that in the insurance industry on first call resolution, where you talk about a national company, which for all intents and purposes is like 50 different companies, and then with different products based on the age cohort or the region. And so similarly, I would suspect that the best way to both build credibility and allow yourself to pause and use kind of stage gate concepts to ensure that before you scale this up or go on a broader base with improving legislative process, you would do it on minor legislation. So some additional considerations that I've included in my testimony, and just to back up for a second, so they were originally going to have this hearing and this review about the data, leveraging data to support the legislative process. It was going to be in July. They postponed it. And a big part of that was because they realized they have these 97 recommendations, and maybe they can go to get some of those implemented. So this thing is still in the queue, and I'm supposed to follow up with them in the next month or so. It's already been submitted, but then the actual date for the hearing is still pending. Hopefully I'll have something to report on that in the not too distant future. So the other considerations that I included in there is that I think an Office of Quality and Process Improvement should have a dual focus. So looking at the quality of the legislative process would be a consistent responsibility, and then support of legislation development. And you can do this through a small team of quality experts, and they could work on, say, 3 to 5 legislative projects at a time, and they would also be supported by a small team of analysts, and those analysts would support the quality experts and provide what was originally being proposed as providing analysis to congressional staff. And you can even start smaller, talking about the kind of the small scale pilot type thing, and just go with one quality expert. Work on the legislative process, build credibility, and really build this Office of Quality and Process Improvement. And one of the things that I really emphasized in the testimony that really worries me about this concept of analysis is you don't want a lot of time spent on analysis if it's just going to be done to support an agenda. And so I think a very important responsibility of this Office of Quality and Process Improvement would be develop good guidelines for the design and the scope of resulting analyses. So with that, I'll just step back and talk about kind of the broader scope of the work that I'm trying to do and tie it back to our learning objectives. So again, my primary focus is really on congressional gridlock and trying to impart into the broader approach to legislation, thinking about process and results. Ideology is not going to go away. The passionately being driven by ideology, it's not going away. But if all this underpinned by a commitment to a solid process and a commitment to results, then you have a chance of reducing some of the gridlock we see today. So certainly this is an individually led effort. I'm just trying to establish some credibility today, and it's a huge problem. It's not going to be solved in my lifetime, but if I can make some impact and help set the foundation for broader improvements, I would consider myself hugely successful. And that work is, I look at myself as more of a facilitator than a doer. I'm going to, on a opportunistic basis, support some of the organizations and efforts that I've heard about. And I'm going to use the accountability and effectiveness principles to really ensure to help drive my scope, because I could very easily go off into some area that is just doesn't help drive us towards that so-called finish line. Again, my overall approach is to work with good organizations, make connections wherever possible, and also hopefully get people on board with this effort. So now let's talk about and contrast kind of Speak Up for Good Government and the ASQ Government Division and the ANSI G1 standard and a key consideration there. So even though this is this huge problem, it's still, what I'm doing is focused quality improvement. When I look at ASQ in general and certainly the G1, the ANSI G1 standard, it's a standard. It provides objective measurement and provides a roadmap to excellence. One of the things that we all share, and really all quality professionals share, is getting support and sponsorship. The most successful quality efforts involve a partnership between quality professionals and someone who is right there in the operations. And if you can build that support and sponsorship and go add without, getting people's eyes to glaze over because you say, hey, you're a quality professional, you're going to implement quality improvement or quality tools, then you have a better chance of being successful. So I think particularly in this space, promoting quality to non-practitioners is very critical in how we go about it. So my next steps are, I've just started my overall journey. I've just started working with ASQ Government Division, and so we'll figure out exactly how we can work together, how I can continue to support ASQ Government Division, and I want to promote ASQ Government Division with the good government organizations that I'm working with. And similarly, I want to do a good job of really publicizing and identifying those good government organizations that are doing the work that supports my principles. So we're not going to go into the detail of these organizations. This is almost like an appendix. There are links to each of these organizations. I have no stake in any of these organizations, so it's more illustrative, and the key is that every one of these organizations support or doing work to actively advance one of my principles. The link to Speak Up for Good Government is my new website. It's very much under development, and I encourage any of you that are interested in this work that you can subscribe. I have a monthly newsletter that essentially details the work, and we'll see where that journey goes. And with that, I'm going to open it up for any questions.
All right. Thank you, Allan. I really appreciate your deep dive into good government. So this is a great opportunity. I've got a few questions, but we have time for other questions. So if you want to enter those questions in the Q&A, or if the Q&A is acting weird, if you want to enter it into the chat, that'd be great. But I will start with a couple of questions. This one might need a bit more interpretation. It says, has there been any tests done? And if so, what has been the outcome of those tests? So I'm imagining tests of applying these principles for good government.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and there really has not been a test. So, and when I stepped back and started this, I tried to do it through the lens of, okay, what's my objective, and what are the conditions that need to be met to meet those objectives? And there's nothing that says that these principles are the final list of principles, or that they are the definitive set of principles to good government. But just through these first 6 months, what I found is they continue to be kind of durable from my perspective. When I look back and think about kind of the obstacles and the things that need to be accomplished, they still seem to continue to be there. And this is where the standards that are developed by ASQ provide such a great kind of synergy here, because when you talk about tests, I think through the development of standards and the roadmap, that allows us to really test out whether the principles really are the right principles.
Great. This is kind of a follow-up, I believe. Could you further discuss the concepts of what makes up good government? I guess the thought process there could be that how we qualify good in government.
Mm-hmm. And that really is, that's a loaded term, right? And one of the things I joked about with people as I was thinking about that is that quality in government, some might argue that it's an oxymoron. I certainly don't believe that. And and again, and this is something that provides a good opportunity as we're working together to really better define what that is. But I think in kind of stepping back on it, without being able to provide a good, smart statement to it, if we have identified the priorities, and typically we don't have too much trouble identifying what government's priorities are, and as such, if the role of government is to work on those priorities and produce legislation that helps to solve those problems, that to me, I think it can be widely adopted. I think when you get into then putting the smart elements to that becomes a little bit more challenging.
Right, absolutely. I understand. Okay. Here's I guess, a question about data in government. When analyzing inputs or data from the public, do you see a role in analyzing sentiment data, so the qualitative data, maybe open text or some of the, let's say open text, along with quantitative data, so count data or decimal data? We have a lot of data that gives us decimal points and digits, but what about the qualitative stuff that kind of tells you a little bit more about what the decimal stuff is talking about? Do you see a role for that?
I think so. And, the concept of maybe citizens' cabinets speaks to that a little bit. So because I think you have to, particularly you think about, talked about kind of the culture piece related to like using the lethal force policing type thing, but more to that. So you think about all of us, when we're trying to implement change, there is something that you can't necessarily quantify. So I think that's a really important piece. And again, I kind of go back to what's interesting to me on this, and we would all feel hugely successful at the end of the day, is, I went into this not so, even though my background and experience is in quality, I just looked at this as a problem that needs to be solved. And it's funny because then as I first started doing it, people were saying, well, you really should leverage your quality background and experience to it. And certainly it helped drive what I'm doing. But I guess what I'm saying is that if we were successful in leveraging quality to help support our government operations, and you think about this Congressional Office of Quality and Process Improvement, a good team of quality practitioners are going to look at the quantitative and the qualitative information to help move things forward.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think this next question is a bit of a piggyback on what you just mentioned. What would be involved in creating a Congressional Office of Quality and Process Improvement?
Yeah, so I think that goes to, so the way I would do it, if someone said, Allan, it's up to you to create this Office of Congressional Quality and Process Improvement, and I'm not interested in doing that. I retired for a reason. I would certainly help support and be on that so-called board of directors for it.
Sure.
But if I was doing it, I probably would find someone who is a really well-established quality practitioner, like a black belt, master black belt, what have you, and I would start small and say, okay, here's my general framework. And I would be thinking a little bit ahead of the game that that's going to need some folks that are some, black belts, green belts, who can actually manage complex projects, know how to deal with people, and know how to communicate in non-quality terms. And I would have that group of analysts to support my work in the office and then to support Congress, so they really truly feel like that there's something in it for them.
Okay, good. So I'll ask this: is there any particular status or stage gates on maybe this proposal for being adopted? Because I can definitely see where, yes, the professionals, the quality professionals that have been trained and been implementing and executing in their fields would provide a bounty of resources to this kind of effort. Then I also see this as an opportunity to for, like, say, students or people who don't necessarily work in government to actually get engaged in the government. But is there any kind of status that of the progression of this proposal?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point, and I could see that at some point in time I put together some specific milestones there. So I'm just looking. First time I saw my picture on there, and the light behind me is really bugging me. But anyway,
you're fine.
So you know, part of it is just kind of like I have it in the back of my head as far as how to go about and gain acceptance and where we are within the journey. And part of this also is I kind of look at this and I kind of knew this all along, how big our government is, and of course you think about all of you, and some of you are involved with the federal government, some are with municipalities, what have you, and there's areas, Mark had made me aware of this Performance Improvement Council that's associated with the GSA. So there's quality is there. And so I'm coming in as this new dude, and I don't even have any credibility. So at the end of the day, I was thinking, if I can just establish credibility, have a little bit of a seat at the table, and be considered somewhat of an influential voice, that to me would be hugely successful. And it's not an ego thing. It's just that I think these things really do have the potential for really giving us the government we want. I suppose down the road, I might take all these, and one of the things I'm working to do on my website is take each of the principles and build them out within the website, and like what some of the organizations are doing. So it might be that we have a little bit of a roadmap. Where in the journey are we for each of those principles? And it's something that I'll work through probably as we get into next year.
Yeah, no, that's great. You did mention 96 principles. And I don't remember, but is there a reference point in this presentation or somewhere else of where to kind of look at those 96 principles?
I wonder if I did do, and if I haven't, I'll make sure there's a link to the Select Committee for the Modernization of Congress. I'll add that to the presentation, and then Neil, I'll send that to you with the update because it's in there. They have a website, talks about their work and the 97 principles, and there's a little bit about planned work. And I haven't looked at it in a little while, but definitely the principles are all there.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, that would be a fantastic resource. Okay, I thought I heard something else. Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you, Allan. We really appreciate your presentation. Learned a lot, and I feel that you use a lot of the right words, particularly towards the end where we talk is a journey. And we as ASQ Government Division, we as practitioners of quality, we as citizens and residents need to get on the journey. There is the government that we want, and we need to start outlining that and pursuing it. There's also the government that we need. Government, we have intractable problems in our communities and our societies that range from social to environmental to economic, and we have to get on this journey to start making our way to some solutions so that we can live in the kind of peace and harmony that's available through our best efforts and high quality standards of living. So thank you very much for this presentation, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future, and maybe even some updates about the journey that you're on, and maybe some others can join the journey.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much. It's just been an absolute pleasure just to share this and really also to speak to other quality professionals. It's a very different audience, and it's very enjoyable.
Yes, thank you. Well, for those who are in attendance with the webinar today, you see on this slide here the slides will be made available, and you can contact, Allan, if you have any additional questions about, some of the information presented today. Everyone who's on the call, we will be sending you your recertification units, and do visit, our MyASQ Government Division website as previously listed, so that you can keep up with what's going on in the Government Division. There's a lot that's happening. So there's a lot of new journeys that are happening. There's some advanced achievements, as mentioned, the ASQ ANSI G1 standard going live this year is one, and we have a few different centers, that we are working, putting in work around elections, around collaboration and thought leaders with Government Performance Excellence Forum. Our Center for Quality Standards that is where the G1 kind of is housed, but is also things will be expanding there. And we are always looking for new opportunities to connect to members and leadership positions. So please feel free to reach out to any one of us on the slide here, but particularly you can reach out to me directly. There's this email and there's another, but you'll be getting your RUs, and we look forward to seeing you here soon in the future. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Y'all have a great day.